Hey everyone, and welcome to Follow the White Rabbit, where we go down the rabbit hole to explore the intersection of privacy, human rights, technology, and democracy. I'm your host, Alex Gluchowski, and today we are speaking with Alex Gluchowski, founder of Matter Labs. He is a software engineer with over 15 years of experience building technology companies, and Matter Labs is an R&D company focused on zero-knowledge proofs. We'll get into that in a little bit, and their practical application on public blockchains. Zero-knowledge proofs are an important technology for ensuring privacy and scalability in blockchain technologies, and I'm really excited to learn more about that today. Alex, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Alex. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And your other co-founder's name is also Alex.
We have quite a lot of Alexes in the company for some reason.
Yeah, how does that happen?
Our name in Europe.
That's cool. So tell me a little bit more about your background in general and kind of how you got, where you started and how you got to working on Matter Labs and zero-knowledge proofs.
Sure. I grew up in Ukraine, moved to Germany when I was 20, completed my education there and worked in software industry in various projects as a software engineer and then as a team lead. And then I moved into startups and was co-founder of a couple of startups. And at some point, I got really interested in cryptocurrencies, and when Bitcoin was on the rise, and I was thinking that Bitcoin might be a solution to the economic problems we have with the government centralizing access to money, and all this libertarian narrative was very, very close to my heart. But at some point, I realized that I cannot integrate Bitcoin into the application we were building, because it didn't have any users, and the marginal benefit of adding Bitcoin payment was quite low. So I realized it's going to be a problem for many services, and there must be some more value proposition for hyper-Bitcoinization to happen. And there were a lot of hurdles around usability and security and convenience of secure solution around Bitcoin, and especially around the price volatility. The price volatility was enormous. And it was really difficult to expect that most people would just embrace it and jump onto Bitcoin. So I get really, really excited when I learned about Ethereum and saw the possibilities Ethereum could offer, and kind of previewed these ideas of stable coins and decentralized finance, because I think it tokenization of all assets and bringing them onto this decentralized platform where everybody can have access without any barriers, any threshold of entry, and just have like truly global trade and financial system for the world as an alternative to this closed system which we have right now, which has this many layers of authority and coercion and whatnot, regulations and so on, which are not necessarily always beneficial for society as a whole. And so I jumped onto Ethereum. I worked for a year as a consultant, just a software engineering consultant, and dived into the problem domains of Ethereum, what was hot there, what was working, what was not working. And I realized that, at least in my opinion back then, we had three big problems. The usability was really below the expectations of the mass users. Security was also really hard to combine with this usability expectations. Like, it was really hard to have both secure and usable system. And finally, we had the scalability problem. We had this famous blockchain trilemma where you could only improve two sides of it, either usability or security or decentralization, but not keep all of them free. And it seemed like a magical circle, like evil circle, where you cannot break out of it. And I thought that scalability is really, really interesting because it requires a technological breakthrough. With the means which we had back then, it was not possible to solve that. The other two problems, security and usability, was solvable. People could just borrow the concepts from the Web 2 world and bring them over to blockchain. And it was kind of clear what path it will go. And eventually, the industry has advanced this way. We have a lot of great applications right now, which match or even exceed the level of user experience which you have with centralized services, with banking services. But scalability seemed like really hard problem. And first I learned about Plasma, and Plasma seemed like a good solution. But then over time, many hidden problems crystallized in the Plasma development, and became clear that it's not going to lead to the kind of let's say magic, like silver bullet, which we were hoping it would be. And then I learned about zero knowledge proofs. And at first I learned about the zero knowledge aspect of zero knowledge proofs, which gives them their name, namely that you can prove to someone that you have some data which satisfies certain properties without revealing that data. And then I also learned that some zero knowledge proofs have this succinctness property, which means that you can efficiently prove very large computations. Like you can perform very large computations, get some result, and then prove to the public that this is the result of this computation, and let them verify it with much lesser effort than was required from you to generate the proof. And I thought, oh, this is cool. Maybe we can apply this to Plasma. So I started looking, search for people, and I ran into my co-founder, who was coming from a different background to the same problem and to the same solution. And it was obvious that we should work together. We just started doing this, and we built the first prototype. And back at that time, it was around 2 years ago, the scalability became a really salient problem in the Ethereum community, especially after the CryptoKitty crisis and a couple of other events, which made it very clear that we won't get anywhere near mass adoption until this is solved. So I thought we should just work on this, because zero knowledge proofs seemed like the most promising way forward here.
Yeah, and I mean, like many people in our space who looked at the various issues, I also have been really interested in zero knowledge proofs. Although I don't have a real technical background. I mean, I'm a self-taught software developer, but I don't write code for my job, so I don't think I'd have the deepest understanding of how it works. But I could see potentially a lot of applications for something like that, where data is like the new oil, right? And it's used all over the internet to provide services and also to create value, and it's sold, and it's in many places that data is created by us, and it's exposed and therefore not that secure, and abused by many services. But if you had something like zero knowledge proofs enabled, and then you could potentially create markets around data where you don't actually have to expose the actual data, and therefore that gives the users more privacy and security around how that data is used, but still can enable the services that rely on it, right? I mean, that's kind of the high level opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so what are some of the, I mean, you guys just recently launched ZK Sync, right?
Yes.
Can you
ZK
tell me
Sync
a
is
little
our
about that?
main product. So yeah, what we're building, what we've been working on for the last 2 years, what we just released, is the first step in a big vision of making Ethereum or decentralized blockchains in general scalable to reach the level of mass adoption. So we want to bring blockchain services to millions and billions of people. And we want to do this without losing the properties of blockchains which make them valuable. And I'm talking specifically about public permissionless blockchains. So we want to keep this public permissionless nature, where you can be sure that the rules of the protocol are observed, and you have very high economic security of what's going on there, like up to the maximum of what this blockchain allows, and nobody can shut this down. And the way we see this happens, we see that the Ethereum model was very successful, namely that you have a blockchain which is very simple as a mental model for developers. So you have contracts which are fairly comprehensible. You can it's just a program which has some state. You can define some logic rules, how the state is processed in reaction to certain events which users can trigger. how these contracts can interact. So we want to keep this in the zero knowledge driven scaling system to keep the same level of simplicity, understanding, the same convenience, account-based model, essentially like the same easiness for users. Users just need a simple access tools like MetaMask or some mobile wallets where they just press one button and it's instantly working. And we want to add some more value onto what we have right now. So obviously scalability is one thing. We need to support a lot more transactions. Now Ethereum is capable of like 5 ERC20 token transfers per second, whereas Visa does 2,000 on average. And Visa is just one of the systems. Alipay does a lot more. And we have also PayPal, and we have all the exchanges and other financial services. We want to bring them all on the blockchain. So we need a lot more capacity. But additional to that, we also need to solve the privacy problem, because nobody is going to bring their entire fortune onto a system which is completely transparent, where every neighbor, every merchant they interact with can see their entire balance, all their financial history, all their contacts, and so on. Like, it's just not thinkable. So we need to solve privacy completely. And we also need to make it a bit more usable. So the transactions have to be instantly confirmed. You need a easy way to recover your account. So when you think about the bank, if you lose your credit card, you can always go back to the bank and get a new one. But if you lose your private key, it's game over. So you want something more designed for an average user, so that we can bring it to millions. So we want to add all those things, and I think the zero knowledge proofs are kind of a unique enabler for these things to happen on decentralized blockchains.
Well, what do you think the impact is going to be on human rights for some of the use cases that this would enable? Is this something your team has thought about a little bit, or the kinds of freedoms that it can bring?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Ukraine, and when I was a little child, my country went through a wave of hyperinflation, where essentially the entire population lost all their savings. So when you say people lose their savings, it's like you lose years of life, which you spared, which you were working hard, hoping to get something for your kids or for yourself, and then all of this was in vain. So like it's an enormous loss, and for many people it was existential crisis. They didn't know what to do. Like, are they gonna get food tomorrow and so on? And we see this happening all over again. Like, we had the number of crises since then, throughout 90s and 2010s and 20s. Even this year we have like Lebanon banking crisis, and South America, and the people in Hong Kong are trying now to exit Hong Kong dollars out of fear that it might go out of peg with US dollar, and they will go through this. So I think it's really, really crucial to give people alternative to the system which is imposed on them through their local governments, because not all of these governments are honest and accountable. We have a lot of people, billions of people in this world, who are living in corrupt regimes. There is no other name for this. They're essentially hostages of the economic systems based on corruption and bribery and this kind of things. So we need to give them access to global financial instruments, to global financial saving possibilities, to investment possibilities, and so on. So I don't see any other technology but blockchain to accomplish this, and I think that this is the most important thing you can work on today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I love that. I think there are a lot of different ways that these technologies can impact human rights, but I think that theme around financial stability, because the protocols control what happens to the marketplace, the market cap, the economy. In some respect, obviously there's speculation and different things that cause the currency to fluctuate, but there are rules that are programmed. There's not a central government that can just decide to do something different all of a sudden and cause something like hyperinflation. Because like when you were growing up, what was it that caused that? What sort of corruption did you see in the Ukraine, or have you seen in other countries that would lead to some catastrophe like a hyperinflation that ruins everyone's savings?
Well, it's all over the place. You go to banks. Sometimes they just close the bank because people steal money because of some, like the barrier of entry into the banking system is high. It's extremely difficult to open a new bank. I think I have seen some really interesting graph of new banks in the world, and like after 2008, after the last crisis, it just goes down like massively. We only have a few because the regulatory burden for the banks is extremely high, and especially in countries with like unstable political systems. You have capital controls. People don't like in some places in Ukraine and in many countries of the like developing world. Nobody's doing any serious trades with their bank accounts. If you purchase an apartment or a house, or you sell a car, it's all done in cash. People literally carry suitcases full of US dollars to make these trades, and it's dangerous. People get hurt. People get robbed, killed for this money, and so on. So like they don't have any other means to invest except for maybe in real estate. They're like countless list of examples. I don't know where to start. It's a long conversation per se.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think it's important for. I always think of people who might be listening that are just coming into the space, and I know a lot of our listeners have been here for a while, but I also think uh, the communication of some of the problems that are being solved is really important. And these examples, like there are probably plenty of people in the U.S., for example, that like don't have those specific examples of how it can go wrong because yes, we've had our fair share in the United States of things that have gone wrong, like 2008, for example, with the mortgage crisis that we had here. But I think most of us have been pretty insulated from that kind of blatant, corruption that led to half your savings getting or all of your savings basically getting eaten up by hyperinflation, for example. So
Well, you had cases where gold was confiscated from the entire population. Gold was banned from being owned or possessed by people, and of course you had 1971 where things just started going haywire with the entire economy. So if you look at the average household income, uh, it was rising constantly until 1971. So there's this famous website,
right.
WTF happened in 1971. Which kind of built up, in my opinion. Maybe maybe it's controversial, but I think it's like causing all these tensions which we're having right now in the U.S. society, because a lot of people lost hope. They could not like people who were born after the Second World War, the Boomer generation. They had this economic prosperity, and they knew that if they just would work hard, they will get to some better future. People right now see that, like young generation, no matter what you do, your salary is gonna hit the glass ceiling. Like it's really hard to do something unless, of course, you go to some exponential industries like startups. But that's like not everybody can do that. This is not for the majority yet. Hopefully,
Right.
this will change as well.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So you guys just recently, I mean, like I think it was 2 months ago, was it that you released ZK Sync live?
It was, I think, a month ago. Yes.
And the first phase of this focuses on the scalability, and then you're going to get into privacy and then smart contracts that are enabled by your technology, right?
Exactly. So the first phase, the first version which we launched, focuses on the token transfers. We make Ether and ERC20 token transfers affordable on Ethereum today because they are already really expensive. We had the gas price rallying over the last couple of months to like very, very high levels.
Mm-hmm.
So you can now use token like just make normal payments on Ethereum with whatever tokens you need really cheaply, having all the security properties, or almost all the security properties of layer one. Of course, we introduced some new assumptions because we're using novel cryptography. But if the protocol is implemented correctly, and if the cryptography is solid and it's been audited and peer reviewed, and we're using very solid scientific tools there, then you have the same guarantees about your assets as though they were on the layer one protocols, in the layer one accounts. So even if we shut down and all the validators shut down and nobody is watching, you can still be sure that you will, like after a long time, be able to come back and get all the assets from ZK rollup. In the next steps, we're going to add smart contracts. So we think that this is very important. This is a very high demand right now in the community to scale also smart contracts, and eventually also privacy.
Okay. And what are your priorities right now? What's your biggest goal since the launch? Obviously releasing the other two phases, but I'm more kind of thinking about, is it getting more validators on board? Is it getting people using the protocol to do these cheaper transactions? What are the things that your team's focused on?
We will eventually get to a multi-validator system, but right now we are as decentralized as it gets in terms of security. Even with a single validator, the system is as secure as Ethereum accounts. So the state is held by all the Ethereum full nodes. So it's not a priority. Priority is to give people usable SDKs for all the different platforms, for mobile platforms first of all, and then also for servers in Golang, Python. We already have a web JavaScript SDK, and also to develop smart contracts. And we have a number of requests from the community of things they would like to see. For example, we have a lot of people want to add their own token. And right now we can only add tokens which have price tracked on CoinMarketCap, but this is going to change soon, and you will be able to add also other tokens without fixed price. So these are the current priorities in the next steps for us.
For the ones that are tracked on CoinMarketCap, do you guys have some kind of Oracle system to pipe that data into your system, or how do you get that data?
So the only reason we need the token to be listed on CoinMarketCap and with the price tracker is so that we can charge the commission adequately in this token, so that user experience remains seamless and users can pay in the same token they transfer. But we're going to open an option to pay for transfer with a different token, and then you can add anything even without a liquid price.
Okay, and so how does it work? What's the commission? You're paying the commission in, let's say someone's using it to send OXT. You're paying the commission in OXT, and then that somehow transfers down to ETH, or does ETH?
Well, the operator collects it, and the operator will then liquidate it to pay for zero knowledge proof generation, to pay for gas, and so on. Okay. So the operator has some costs, and we just cover the basic costs. At the end, it's going to be a multi-validator system where the market will determine these prices, but they're going to be low because the production cost of zero knowledge proofs is relatively low, much lower than the cost of the gas which we spend per transaction. But eventually, this is also going to change. In ETH2, the cost, the capacity of data throughput of Ethereum 2.0 is much higher than in Ethereum 1. And this is going to increase the capacity and also the throughput capacity, and also decrease the price of any ZK rollup solution or any rollup solution. But there might be also some more advanced techniques which we'll discuss later.
Okay. And what are you hoping the community will build? I mean, I know you've gotten requests, but your project's open source, right? And so I'm assuming you guys want other people contributing or building dApps and applications on top of your technology. Do you guys have ideas you're hoping that people will execute on, or a vision there?
Well, it's really easy to think about ZK Sync as an extension of Ethereum. So you can build anything you can build on Ethereum. It will be just cheaper, have higher throughput, and be eventually privacy aware. So we don't have any specific application in mind because there are a lot of awesome ideas which people are trying to build on Ethereum or were trying to build on Ethereum or other blockchains, which that just couldn't be built because everybody understood that the scalability is going to be a bottleneck. And at current gas prices, it just won't work. It won't be feasible. So right now, we're just opening the way for all those applications to be built.
So I'm changing tack a little bit here, but I'm interested to learn more about what it was like growing up in the Ukraine. I don't think I've ever asked anybody from the Ukraine that, and I've never been there. I mean, I know a few folks from the Ukraine, but I've never actually had that conversation before. So I'm just curious.
Well, now Ukraine is a nice place. When I was a kid, it was right after the Soviet Union collapsed, and it was pretty devastating and like miserable. I'd say like all the systems just broke down. Like the existing systems did not work. The new systems have not yet built. My dad was serving as a policeman, and he would not get salary for a year. You can imagine what happens in a country where the policemen don't get salary. The crime thrives, and it's dangerous to go on the street, and you have to be constantly aware, and you feel a lot of stress from the people around you who are like having this existential fears about their life because they don't know what to do. They like all they've learned, and all they've been used to is now obsolete. They have to relearn completely, and they have this often desperation. So it was not a pleasant experience. It's changed now. It's much better. So like I really encourage you to go and visit Ukraine. It's a beautiful place. With like you feel a lot of hope right now in the younger generation. Everybody speaks English, and I mean younger people, of course. It's really nice, beautiful. It still has some political problems. It still has a lot of corruption, but it's getting better. So like for U.S. and European citizens can go without visa. No reason why not to go.
All right, it's on my list. As soon as this lockdown abates and we're able to get out of the United States and travel, I'm curious, how did that, how has that impacted your professional career and some of the choices you made, and how did you get into building software?
So I wanted to do something. As a kid, I wanted to become a scientist and make discoveries. And then I wanted to be an engineer and invent stuff. And then the more I worked in engineering, I realized that like the way work is organized has a tremendous impact on how the productivity is structured. So you can be a great engineer, but do something which is completely useless. And then all your effort is kind of in vain. Even if you worked on an interesting thing and you had a lot of fun doing this, at the end, it doesn't impact the world so strongly. And I wanted to make a positive impact. Like I wanted to do something useful for the world. And then I got familiar with libertarian ideas, and I realized that changing the rules in the society is even more important than inventing new technologies. And one of very bright instances of this is a TED talk by Paul Romer, who was talking about charter cities. It's a very famous TED talk, and it has a very beautiful opening. He shows a guy somewhere in Africa who's sitting under a public lantern and reading books because at home he doesn't have electricity. He has to go to the public airport where he has some street lights. But he says, curiously, this guy has a cell phone in his pocket. So how can it be that he has access to technology which is like 5 years old and doesn't have access to technology which is 100 years old? It's a paradox. It's not a technological problem. It's some weird societal problem rooted in the rules which evolved somehow naturally in this society, which lead to this weird situation. You cannot solve it with technological means. You need to solve it with political means. But political means means what? Like go vote? Like just have one binary input every 5 years? It's not a solution. Like it's too non-essential. We need something different. And then with blockchain, I realized that there are technologies which can have a strong societal impact. We see it with the internet. Like the shift from internet, from the television to internet, has created massive change in the way people perceive politics and can influence politics, and also get like access to information and all this. I think the blockchain is going to have an even bigger impact on how wealth is distributed in the world and how power structures are distributed. And this is very, very interesting. I think there is, like, sincerely, nothing more interesting and more important to work on.
I agree with you, and I think that example of the TED Talk is really interesting, especially in reference to Africa and sort of these emerging economies and markets. I think they tend to leapfrog technologies. Instead of having landline phones, they skipped to telephones. I mean, to cell phones, right? And everybody all of a sudden had a cell phone, and they could do SMS, and they could send money, from their mobile device, that kind of thing. And you see like the explosions of these new technologies. I'm curious what you think. Like, what are some of the applications that need to exist to empower those kinds of people, the guy sitting under the light post with his phone, to gain access to blockchain technology and the benefits that it can bring from a financial, access to financing, access to a bank, quote unquote, or an account. What are some of the things that are being built or that need to be built to enable that to happen?
Well, I think it's really on the surface. We need scalability, we need privacy, and we need the wallets which are user friendly. And we already have all of those. We just need to gradually improve them and bring them to the level which is required to get it to people, and then just go through natural process of distribution. Just giving people an alternative to the bank account, which they can count upon, is already like a very big step. So by saying they can count upon, I mean something that people perceive as secure. Because right now in the public perception, blockchain is, in developing countries especially, is not something secure. Like when we're hiring developers in Eastern Europe, we always have to convey the message and like counter the popular perception that blockchain is something like scammy and it's a lot of scam and it's just a bunch of Ponzi schemes. Because this is what happened in 1917 with all the ICO boom. Like we had a lot of scam projects. A lot of people lost their money because it was kind of a Wild West, unregulated terrain where anybody can do anything. And capitalism is good at creating innovation in both good and evil ways. The people are very creative, and they come up with new ways to scam people and to undermine the trust. But there is also a counter movement of people who are like building reputation services and providing diligence and so on. So like it just takes time to mature for services which are trustworthy to crystallize. Because you always have some level of trust in these applications. Even if you use like Bitcoin with full node, you still trust the developers of this Bitcoin wallet. Even if you have a hardware wallet, you still trust the developers in this hardware wallet. You did not audit it yourself, right? Very few people would audit the software code or
compile it themselves,
compile it themselves, and So you still have some trust level, but it's a different kind of trust. It's not an ongoing trust. It's not that you bring your money to them. It's that they produce something, they make it public, and then there is cross review by other people, and then you have a lot of signals coming together saying that this is trustworthy. And then you can take and use it, and once you've taken it, they cannot change their mind and say like, oh, now we're gonna do something sneaky. So like it's really important, and it will take time for people to believe that the systems are secure, that stable coins work, that price volatility will eventually be, like if you invest in cryptocurrencies, eventually be going up and not down. that the wallets work, that the account recovery works, and so on.
Yeah, so I mean, I still
I think
think
it's just natural.
there's a need to. You make a good point about the wallets. Like there are definitely good projects out there, good wallets. I think they're in emerging markets that there's still, and I think also in first quote unquote first world markets too. There's still opportunities for competition in that space, more in like the pick and shovel type infrastructure type projects in applications built on top of things like what you guys are building and in Ethereum yeah, it's just really interesting to watch and see what entrepreneurs are popping up in those emerging markets and what they're building to solve some of these problems. I think it still feels very early days, even though so much has been accomplished in the last decade in our space. It still feels like there's a lot of opportunity to build these applications.
Very true.
What do you guys have you have a token associated with the functionality of your system, correct?
We don't have a token yet, but it's planned for the future, for the stage where we will have decentralized version with multiple validators.
And can you tell me more about how that token will work, what it's used for? Can you share more about that?
Sure, it will work in the background. We don't want the end users to be dealing with it because we don't want to introduce any friction in the user experience for the mass users. So it will be used by the validators to govern access to the block production. Essentially, if you own 10% of the token, you will be you will get a right to produce 10% of the blocks. Roughly, it's going to work in like a bit more complicated manner. But the idea of the token is to provide a way to decentralize the protocol to make it censorship resistant also at layer 2, not only at layer. So we're already censorship resistant at layer 1 level. So we like the operator cannot freeze user's token in zk sync. So the operator can refuse to surface a given user or just shut down, but it doesn't mean that the access to the funds itself is frozen. But we also want to get to a situation where even at layer 2, it's fully decentralized and doesn't rely on any single party. And for this, we need the token to govern the participation and also to govern for general governance of the protocol, for decision making on like how you upgrade to the next version, what functionality to add, and so on.
And what's your goal for the decentralization of the validators and the distribution of the token? How do you think you achieve? I guess it's a two-part question. Like, what's the goal? I'm thinking, how many validators do you need, and how do you achieve that goal?
We are going to publish an article on this by the end of this month, so I would just postpone this question until then.
All right, I hear you. Well, I'll look forward to that. And actually, for everybody listening, by the time we release this podcast, that will probably have been released. So you can check the show notes. I'll try to link to it in the show notes so that people can check that out. But I am really curious to see how that shakes out. I think there's so much, from a democratization standpoint of these platforms. Like that's another really great intersection of human rights, privacy, technology, and democracy. Is that these platforms are implementing, platforms like yours and like Compound and all these DeFi projects are implementing governance tokens that are used to actually vote on everything from the profit that you can get as a validator to new features that need to be developed and prioritized and funded for the protocol. And it's a very democratic, like truly democratic way to run what in the centralized space would have been a company with, I guess, shareholders, but in the decentralized space is not a company, it's a network that's governed by the token holders. It's just really interesting thing to see how that shakes out and the different incentive models that come out. I don't know if you've been tracking the whole explosion on Compound of people doing yield farming, but it's been really interesting to watch the different strategies for decentralization come out. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or not, but if you do, I'm interested to hear what you think. Not related to your token, just in general.
I absolutely believe that these new models, like the programmability of money and of tokens, enables entirely new ways to interact with to interact for a group of people. So you can tokenize, like you can do a lot more than just a simple shareholder voting. And I don't have much to comment on these developments because we were focused on our thing, and we're having a lot of large backlog of things we are working on specifically. But I'm really curious to see how this evolves and all the new models which will emerge.
So we have about 15 minutes left in the episode, and I always ask people that I talk to, what have I not asked you that I should have asked, or is there anything else you want to share or talk about that's related to the intersection of human rights, privacy, technology, democracy, or to what you're working on?
Well, there are many interesting topics. So I think just one thing which I would like to raise is that it's important in the context of human rights and what we discussed before, the rise of well, I don't know. Let's say I think it's important to act early. I think so. I lived in Germany for the last 10 years, and the history of Germany shows that you're never really insulated from the political situation changing 180 degrees. Like in Ukraine, when I was a child, I could not have imagined in the nightmares that my country would enter a war within my lifetime. It was just so out of the war was something that has passed 70 years. Like it was unimaginable, and then all of a sudden, like people are dying every day in Ukraine in the war with Russia, and it was a similar thing in Germany. Like if Germany used to be I mean, I'm talking about the Nazi side. Before that, Germany used to be one of the most cultivated and countries in Europe. Germans were regarded as a very decent, very honest, very like a very very good nation. And all of a sudden, there is a dictatorship, and the country turns into a totalitarian nightmare. And it was not the majority of population, but somehow people got soaked into this, and these things happen. It can happen everywhere. The difference now is that we have all these machine learning technologies which will make the control of the population like really approaching that from anti-utopias, and like it's really really scary. And if you don't act now, it might be too late at some point. And I really don't know. Like just saying that doesn't convey the level of concern which I have about this. And I understand that most people would just say, "Oh, okay, maybe, yeah," but it's such a long tail risk for me, and this will probably not happen. Just as you mentioned before, like people in the U.S. don't feel threatened from like their freedoms and democracy, but it can happen. Like it can turn really really fast, and you want to be prepared. And I don't know how to coordinate this kind of resistance, preemptive resistance, to get there. So I think it's really important just to think about this and make some plans, unite, and think more. Like especially for people who are working in blockchains and technology in general, because we have the most capacity to do something against this with all the cryptography, with privacy preserving technologies, and with technologies to empower people with self-sovereignty, like blockchain.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's some very troubling signs, and across the world in various democracies and dictatorships all over the world of a turning point potentially happening very quickly. With what's happened with the economic crisis, and then obviously COVID-19, and a lot of instability. And in the U.S. we have this election coming up, and back in 2016, there were a lot of questions about what happened during that election and the security, and then the spread of misinformation. I mean, one of the things you bring up about machine learning and AI and its ability to be used to control the population. There are so many ways that it can be abused, right? It's like kind of hard to even track all the different possible applications there that could be abused. But one of them is definitely the dissemination of disinformation, which we know happens regularly, and that it's used as an attack vector from various countries on each other, right? So yeah, I share your concerns. I don't. I think in many ways, I still feel like the United States is in a position of the potential to be a leader in the world, depending on what happens in the next election, and that we can regain some of the footing that we've probably lost in the last 4 years. But it'll be curious to see what happens. I'm wondering what you think. What kind of actions you think people can take to prepare? I mean, I know what I'm personally doing, right? Like I'm personally getting involved and trying to support the politics and the policies that I think can help us go in the right direction, and also taking some steps locally to support my own community and people in my community who are struggling, because I think that's one way to help. I don't know, it's not the solution, but it's one way to help. But I'm curious what you think are the ways that people can, that maybe aren't in the space too. Like, what can they do?
I think we should support any initiative and any technology, any development which increases the power of an individual and decreases the power of authority of the state. Like, support any policy which gives individual more rights and less rights to the state, and especially support the technologies which enforce these rights. Because it's one thing to have something in the law, and then you have some secret guidelines for some secret services which they completely ignore and do some different thing because nobody knows. So like embrace strong encryption, embrace, like, move as much of your assets as possible to something you control and not the bank's control. Move your businesses to online, or like to like where you have more protection. This kind of things. Like, try to be more like invest in companies who are encouraging these things and so on. Right? That's kind of my take on this.
It makes sense, yeah. And I think also too, I would say if you're in a position where you're working somewhere that you see these abuses, you have exposure to some of these abuses that the public is not aware of. Basically just blowing the whistle in a responsible way, trying to say, hey, this is happening and it's not right. And I think the reason I bring that up is I recently had an episode with Cindy Cohen, who is the executive director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which I'm sure you're familiar with the EFF. And she told some pretty incredible stories of folks that exposed some things that were happening here in the U.S. that were basically just dragnet surveillance of the public. I mean, the government's trying to do something good and surveil the bad guys, quote unquote, but in the process are basically surveilling the entire population, which is not, without a warrant, with no legal process, basically no due process, which is, I don't think that's right. I'm trying to think. We've covered a lot of ground, and your story. Like, I really appreciate you sharing your story about growing up in the Ukraine. That was super interesting to hear, and how that's kind of led you down to where you are today. But thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex. This was really interesting for me as well.